Hello and welcome to Trekkie Tuesdays, this episode, The Immunity Syndrome. So that was really fun. Been like a long, tiring week for me, and I was really in a position to empathize with this crew that really is looking forward to shore leave, um, which Kirk expresses using really creepy jokes. Um, but they're then forced into this really dramatic battle against an invading. They keep calling it a virus. I feel like bacterium would have worked better as a metaphor. Um, and they have to act as antibodies to save the galaxy. There's all sorts of drama about who's going to risk dying slightly sooner than everybody else by going out in a shuttlecraft to try to probe the interior of the thing. And it's all very well paced and intense. I feel like Star Trek doesn't always do thriller that well. It can drag, and sci-fi in general, it's a little hard to do a sci-fi thriller because you have to do all this exposition all the time, but I feel like they really pull it off with this one. And it's got heart.
Yeah, I thought it was a good episode. Holds up pretty well. There were times when I laughed and didn't quite cry, but there were a few moments where I felt like a little bit of heart-wrenching going on, and a really solid story. I mean, it was a little cheesy with the amoeba or whatever it was, but I think it held up good enough. I don't think it needs to be a believable premise. I think you're allowed to give me one kind of ridiculous thing and then just go with it, and that's what they do, and they really don't add a lot of weird bells and whistles. It's just this is a stressful situation for the crew, and a crew of really good people that think they're about to die, and know that they're not going to die, but you're it does have this feeling of it almost felt like a movie or something. I knew that there were more episodes, but I was also but this feels so end of a season almost, or something. Maybe somebody won't make it or something, and everybody does make it, and it's good, and it's not the end of a season, but I think it just speaks to the writing in this episode. I'd be curious to know who the writer is, and maybe we should be looking out for more stuff that they did, and try to see what else they've done if we've seen anything yet of them, because I thought it really was a well written episode all around. I think the relationships between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are always fun, and really, I think ultimately Star Trek is a lot of cool ideas and a lot of experimenting, and that's great, but I think what people most resonate with are the characters and their storylines. I think that's always what stories come down to, and so it was nice to have a real Kirk, Spock, and McCoy story, and also still highlighting all the other folks on the bridge who are doing good work, like Scotty and Uhura and Chekhov even, and you really feel this sense of pride for the Enterprise, because they're not just saving themselves, and it's not just about Kirk looking good. It's about this team of people that are potentially saving the galaxy. They're not doing this out of some kind of inflated ego thing, which is often what Star Trek is, and you're always why are we doing this? It seems like you're putting yourself in unnecessary danger right now. And this was a much more compelling story of nobody wanted to be there. Nobody wants to be exploring this weird thing on the edge of the galaxy. But we're here, this is our job. We're all tired, but we're gonna do it, and we're maybe we won't make it, but we're gonna figure out what we can figure out and try to save ourselves. And I feel like they did a really good job of that. I think there were some interesting lines with Spock in this episode about what it's like to be a Vulcan and how Vulcans experience death versus humans. I felt like I wanted to know more about that. I don't know if it like really provided a lot of clarity, but like seemed interesting. I think I'm always very curious about Vulcans and like what they're like, and I think it's like one of the more intriguing parts of Star Trek is like, who are Vulcans and like what are the relationships between humans and Vulcans besides like, oh silly Vulcans, oh silly humans, like what's going on there? And like this was really interesting. There's this one moment where a whole bunch of Vulcans die, and like apparently Vulcans don't really die very often, or like not so much at once, like in mass murder type things, to the point where like Spock is able to feel it and like sense it before any of the sensors are really picking it up or anything. And he talks about the like collective consciousness or something, which is very what's his name?
Jung.
E. I don't
Jungian.
know. Jungian. I should know this, I guess. I like. I'm curious if he meant that like quite literally. Is this because he's a telepath? Like, I don't really know what his powers are. But it seems cool. Be interested to know more about that. And like the idea that Vulcans have never been like conquered in any way he brings up, which is sort of like, whoa, it's like pretty heavy.
Yeah. It's interesting because previously one of the very few things we knew about Vulcans is that they had been conquered at some point.
You would think they had been. Like, they don't act like a people that has never been conquered, in my mind. I don't know. And like, they're in like a federation. Like, I feel like once you're in a federation, you're like inevitably starting up something. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It seemed a little far-fetched, but interesting. There was also not a ton of like racist or sexist things that happen in this episode. I feel like it's much more realistically like this is about like space and like what it's like to be on like almost part of like a military kind of thing of like where you're part of a team and you're doing a mission, rather than like these are our like weird metaphor thoughts about society, which I think Star Trek is more than not. / here's an adventure with like one main guy doing everything. Let's watch him rip off his shirt, you know, which is like off in the episodes. Kirk doesn't have to rip off his shirt during this episode. It like stands alone. And like they do like sandwich the episode with these like two weird remarks about how Kirk really wants to go to shore leave, if you know what I mean, and then like looks at a woman passing by, and like that's sort of gross. But
it's dirtier than that. It's a really dirty joke.
I don't even want to think about it, but it's like it's pretty gross, and like that's there. But like if you just missed those few seconds because you had like stepped out of the room for that minute, like you'd be golden. This was really like pretty non-offensive as far as I could tell on the like list of Star Trek episodes, and I feel like it might be a winner. Might be. They should redo this story. Like maybe fix up the amoeba plotline or something, but like you know, I feel like you could make it slightly more plausible sounding, and I don't know.
I feel like this pattern gets used fairly often. Like they riff on it.
Another striking thing about this episode too was that there's this choice that Kirk has to make between Spock and McCoy on who's going to kill themselves, basically, and he chooses Spock. Like, right before I was asking Aaron, like, who would you choose? And he said Spock. And I was like, agreeing with that. And then I said, but who do you think they're going to choose? And he said Kirk, which I also agreed with. Like, often Kirk is just the brave one, And even though it doesn't make any sense, he will do, the thing that he's supposed to do. And in this one, he like made this like choice. I thought he was gonna say Spock and then run downstairs and like do it himself and trick them, because of course they would never let him go down. He's the captain. But he didn't. He let Spock do it, and Spock really saved the day. I thought that was cool and like more believable to me, and the right choice in that situation.
Kirk is exhausted and sick, and he gets this very flat affect, and I feel like, and it makes him colder. I think it makes him a little more Spock-like, enough that he's able to make the cold decision of putting Spock on the shuttlecraft.
McCoy does this smile, and I hate McCoy as a character, but every time he smiles, like this big grin, I can't help but be like, oh, like he's just like a baby on a ship, and like trapped with all these like moody teenagers, and like he's just like, I want to go. But he doesn't smile at that. I think maybe when Spock's alive, I forget. Yeah, like we find out Spock is alive, surprise, and he's just like, oh. I'm totally delighted.
Yeah, almost any time McCoy grins, I feel like it's Spock related.
It's super great. Because they hate each other, but they love each other. Well, this episode featured a ton of like these things where you go, and then they like made it 3D, like where you would put on the glasses.
Yeah. Tune in next week for A Private Little War. Don't worry. We'll keep it private.
It's kind of crazy.